Bible, wait a minute, myriad examples in the Bible of God speaking directly to people, as Kim claims God spoke directly to him, aren't there?
And given that they're in the Bible, these people and their experiences, which I think broadly are primarily fictitious, but these people and their experiences are therefore special, and they become special in tradition, and they become special in the community. And I think to a certain degree, modern days people's experience of God speaking to them makes them feel special as well. And that's not to judge it, it's simply to say that it sets you out, it sets you apart from the rest.
We're just going to talk about the Bible, and I want to learn more about it. First off, who wrote it and when?
Some people think that Moses wrote it, which he didn't, because Moses didn't exist. So then you have to think, well, who did write it? And it's basically a collection of different authors from centuries and centuries. So probably with the Hebrew Bible or Old Testament, you're talking about at least 500 years in the making. With the New Testament, you're talking about probably 150 to 200 years in the making. But basically, it was all written by men with daddy issues.
So here's the thing. There are people right now writing complaint letters just on the first answer to the first question. Right, so I'm wondering, why is taking a historical approach to the Bible so controversial?
It's controversial because when you do take a historical approach, so look at the archaeological evidence for events or people described in the Bible, it's very hard to find corroborating evidence to support the biblical claims about the past. So once you start saying, did this actually happen or not? So was Jonah swallowed by a big fish? Obviously, no, he wasn't swallowed by a big fish. Was there an exodus from Egypt? No, there wasn't an exodus. So once you start doing that, then you have to start doubting the credibility of all the other claims that the Bible makes. And that's why people get annoyed, because for some reason, people like to think that the Bible's true.
Right.
Well, the Bible is the most widely purchased, most thoroughly revered, and probably most broadly misunderstood book in the history of human civilization. One of the things that's misunderstood, at least by my 19-year-old students at Chapel Hill, is that when we're reading the Bible, we're not actually reading the words of Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John. We're reading translations from the Greek language in which these books were written. And something is always lost in translation. And not only that, but we're not reading translations of the originals of these books, because we don't have the originals of these books or of any of the other books of the New Testament. What we have are copies made centuries later, many of them many, many centuries later. These thousands of copies that we have are all different from one another in lots of little ways, and sometimes in big ways. There are places where we don't know what the authors of the New Testament originally wrote. Now, for some Christians, that's not a problem because they don't have a high view of Scripture. For others, it's a very big problem. What does it mean to say that God inspired the words of the text if we don't have the words? Moreover, why should one think that God performed the miracle of inspiring the words of the Bible if he didn't perform the miracle of preserving the words of the Bible? If he meant to give us his very words, why didn't he make sure we received them? Betrayed by one of his followers, he's turned over to Pontius Pilate, and during his trial, Jesus doesn't say anything to Pontius Pilate, except Pilate says, "Are you the king of the Jews?" And Jesus says, "Su leges," you say so. That's all he says. He's taken out to be crucified. He doesn't say anything. He goes to the place of crucifixion. He's silent the entire way. They nail him to the cross, and he's silent. You get the idea of Jesus being in shock at what's happening to him. While he's on the cross, everybody mocks him. The Roman soldiers mock him. The people passing by mock him. Both other people being crucified mock him in Mark's gospel. At the end, Jesus, who has been betrayed and denied and deserted and handed over and condemned and mocked, Jesus on the cross finally cries out, "Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani?" My God, why have you forsaken me? And he dies. Jesus goes to a painful, humiliating death, unsure of why it's happening to him, in Mark's gospel. Contrast that with Luke's gospel. In Luke, you have some of the same elements, but a very, very different emphasis. In Luke's gospel, when Jesus is going to be crucified, he's not silent. He sees some women by the side of the road, and he turns his head to them, and he's carrying his cross, and he says to them, "Daughters of Jerusalem, don't weep for me. Weep for yourselves and for your children, for the fate that's to befall you." Here, Jesus isn't in shock and not wondering why this is happening. He's concerned about these people more than himself. While being nailed to the cross in Luke's gospel, Jesus prays, "Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing." That's not in Mark, that's in Luke. While Jesus is hanging on the cross, it's not that both robbers mock him. One of the crucified people mocks him, and the other turns his head to the man and says to be quiet because Jesus hasn't done anything to deserve this. He then looks to Jesus and he says, "Lord, remember me when you come into your kingdom." And Jesus replies to him in Luke, "Truly I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise." This is not somebody who's wondering why this is happening to him. He knows what's happening to him, he knows why it's happening to him, and he knows what's going to happen to him after it happens to him. He's going to wake up in paradise, and this guy's going to be with him. At the end, most telling of all, in Luke's gospel, instead of crying out, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Jesus says, "Father, into your hands I commend my spirit."